Hi guys, I want to jump in today and speak with someone that have been in Ukraine, surrogacy in Ukraine, you know, for quite, I say quite a few months, for quite a period. So Whitney will share her story. But if you are curious about how is Ukraine right now, how's everything is going, and what does it mean from the parents' perspective? Yes, to have surrogacy in Ukraine. I think Whitney has so much information for you, and I really want you to hear that story. Okay, with that, let's just jump in. Hi, Whitney.
Hi, Maria. Good to see you.
So nice to see you as well. All right. So I would let you speak about yourself and share as much as you want, or maybe as little as you want. You're not just a typical parent, I should say, because of some work that you do and also some vision that you had even before starting surrogacy in Ukraine. So, would you want to share some of that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it was mid 2021, our doctor told us that we needed to use a surrogate to have a baby after doing many years of IVF. And it was one of these unexplained situations where we had what looked like great embryos and they couldn't figure out what was wrong. And they said, this is your best option. So we started to research and we realized that to do this in the US, it would be crippling, the amount of money that it would cost. I think the numbers have even gone up since then. I'm hearing like 150 to $200,000 to do
Yeah,
it in the US.
unfortunately, yes, basic program. Yes.
Yeah, so that just felt like we're going to bankrupt ourselves if we do that. So we started to research where we could do this instead. And my husband had a colleague who had just done surrogacy in Kazakhstan. So we were like, okay, maybe we should do it there. And as we researched people, and I don't know a ton about how it works there, but I heard several people say it's not ethical the way that they do it there. They're not paying their surrogates enough. And so we started to think really hard about what are the ethics of the situation? How do we make sure we choose a place where a surrogate is well cared for and getting paid an appropriate amount of money, but also that we're protected. Um, and to back up a little bit, I think some of our concerns about the US were also we learned that in some states you have to adopt your own child. So we
Mhm.
wanted to make sure that we were in a situation where our names would go straight on the birth certificate and we wouldn't have to worry about that kind of paperwork. Of course there's going to be some legal paperwork involved, but this is our biological child. The child should come to us right away. So um, we quickly found out that there were a few countries where it's, ethical and well regulated and great laws, and Ukraine quickly rose to the top of the list. And it seemed like it was the place with the greatest availability of surrogates. There weren't long wait times like in some other countries. Um, and as a journalist, and a filmmaker, I quickly decided that I wanted to make a film about the process because it's what I do. And it helps me understand the world, but also I think because of all these ethical concerns, I find it to be really important to unpack those and think about, how do we work through those? How do we make sure that everybody is protected? How do we make it better so that people in the US can afford to do it here? That's part of the point of the film is we shouldn't have to go to Ukraine. It's great if you want to go there, but we shouldn't have to, especially in a country where it is legal. It should be more available to us. So part of the idea is to tell this really personal story and talk about these ethical concerns, but also sort of poke at some of the problems that do exist. So started working on that. And then, as you said, I was doing some other work too. So I worked for the Washington Post for 17 years and was there as a video journalist. And right as the war, right before it started in Ukraine, the Post asked who would like to go cover the build up to this war. And I was like, well, we just sent embryos over and we're making this documentary. And, all of these reasons that just made sense for me to volunteer to go. So I got to go to Ukraine for the first time in January of 2022,
Oh,
stayed for almost 3 months as the war started. Um, Actually, like, sort of, Maria, I'm sure you remember this,
yeah,
the intense story of us starting our surrogacy journey. Like, we had embryo transfers 2 days before the war started, and then
exactly.
didn't know whether they were pregnant for the, first 2 weeks of the war, and it was really intense. But yeah, so they weren't pregnant, and we ran out of embryos. And after a pause in the programming, when things seemed to stabilize in a lot of the country, we decided to restart and made more embryos and sent those over.
Mhm.
And we were about to give up. I remember
Yeah.
when we were going to have our meeting with our current surrogate, and I said to my husband, "Hey, you want to come? We're going to have this Zoom meeting and meet her for the first time." And he said, "No. And what's the point? It's
Mhm.
not going to work."
Mhm.
I think we
Well,
had both kind of given up, but it
yeah.
worked.
Yes, and it worked. And we're holding our fingers crossed that we're not gonna say the gender or anything unless you want to share, but we waiting for the baby. You're already quite far along in the journey. So hopefully now next time it would be third time that you're visiting Ukraine, you're already picking up your incredible baby. Yeah, guys. So like my belief is not to sugarcoat and not to share just incredible victories. There are many, many victories. There are many journeys that are easy. Success in the first try, and everything is just smooth and seems like things are aligning. With that, there are families, just like Whitney, and her husband, where we don't know, like no one knows, right? It was very hard before they even made decision to go with surrogate. Then even with a surrogate, I know we had several surrogates, several tries, and like she said, sometimes you're at the point where like I'm giving up. I'm always, and because you brought it up, maybe we also could like talk about it, because now you're looking through the other side. In those darkest moments, I'm always like would love to share with the families that even in your hardest journeys, the moment you stop, right? And I know it sounds crazy because you're like, well, sure, you want us just to go forever. That's really not the intent, right? But I've had quite a few families where they were so ready to give up, and then the miracle happens. And then when they hold their child, they're like, you know what? It doesn't matter what happened before. We have this child, and when you look at the child, that feeling, that was that child that was supposed to be, right? I don't know how to say it. So maybe yes, none of the embryos were meant to be, right? None of it was meant to be that particular child. So Whitney, and we're gonna come back to Ukraine and to your meeting with the surrogate and other things, but do you have anything to share to someone? Because there might be someone right now, just like you saying, what even the point?
Yeah, I mean, I think our story is a really good indication of it can work if you keep trying. I mean, again, we don't have the baby yet, so we'll see. But
Knock on wood, yes.
yeah, yeah, knock on wood. But yeah, I mean, I think that any sane person would have looked at our situation and said, "Why are you continuing to try the same thing over and over again after so many failures?" And I mean, I think we did 5 embryo transfers with me before we started surrogacy. And then our current surrogate is our 5th surrogate. And
Yes.
we probably went through, I think, like 13 embryos overall or something like that. I mean, it's an incredible amount of attempts when you think about it. And, you know, I think I don't know why it worked the last time. I think there were some medical things that we maybe figured out. We're not sure yet. I think it's really frustrating that, in our case, it probably was a male factor issue. And it's frustrating that the clinics don't think to say, oh, there's this one more test you can do. Like we thought we had done every test in the book. And then when we made this last set of embryos, they said, oh, no, there's one more test that you can do. You can try something else. And
And you
that's really
come in
frustrating.
America, like the
In
embryo.
the US.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, yep.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's just, so baffling to me that they put you through all of these tests, and you think you've done everything that you can do, and you find out that there's more.
Mhm.
And so that's hard. But I think, yeah, sometimes things work out if you persist. Sometimes they don't. I think that's also important to remember, like it's not always going to work. And maybe your path needs to be something different. We were prepared to start thinking about adoption, and that was really, really daunting to think about a whole other journey to
Yeah,
take. Um, but sometimes things do work, and the persistence pays off, and sometimes you have to pivot and try something else. And
yeah.
you just have to go through the journey to figure out what your path is.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I love about your family that you're so supportive of each other. Yes, that I think is also important, and that you could be transparent. And not everyone is the family of, two parents. Some of you just might be one parent, but you need to have that support system where you could bounce things off and just look each other in the eye and say, what is still true for us? Yes. And only you could say without looking at anyone else, because average does not work. Majority, tell me what majority people are doing also doesn't work when you deal with fertility. Yes. Well, thank you so much. Okay, well, let's go more to the happy moments, I guess. You had, I think, the privilege, right? I don't know, or the lack or the blessing to know your surrogates personally. Yes, more than that, the last time you came, you actually met your surrogate. What would you say about those ladies? And the reason I'm asking, because you started the conversation about ethical side. Yes, I know I am on fire whenever I'm talking about Ukrainian ladies. I think every single one of them that made decision to be a surrogate and was selected to be a surrogate because the process is very complicated and very intense how we're selecting them. But I feel like every single one of them is angel. And sometimes I don't know if I'm having enough words to describe it, why I think they're so special. So in your own words, and maybe you say, you know what, no, they just average. But what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who makes the decision to carry a child for somebody else is incredibly special, even if a huge part of their motivation is financial, because that is going to be the reality for many of these folks, and there's nothing wrong with that. Um, they're still, making incredible sacrifices. Our surrogate, was in the hospital for quite a bit at the beginning of her pregnancy and just went through a lot of physical challenges to carry our child. And, she probably could have said, like, this is too much, and stopped, but she didn't. So I've met three of the surrogates that we've worked with, and they're all incredibly special. We're very dedicated to trying to make this work for us. And um, and as everybody knows, they all have their own children too. So they're sacrificing a lot to do this while they have their own kids. And for many of them, they're also facing a lot of stigma. In Ukraine, for many people, it's still considered, they're people look at this and frown upon it in some cases. I think that we're really lucky our current surrogate is a little bit older and she's very confident and understands that this stigma exists and just says, I'm doing what I'm doing and I don't care if people know. And I really admire and respect that. But I also understand when other people aren't in situations where they can do that, because that can be really heavy to have to deal with that if the people around you don't support what you're doing.
Mm.
So, I think the fact that many of them are doing it despite the stigma that they're facing is also really, really incredible. So,
And when you say stigma, what would you like? What do you mean under that?
I think for some people they face criticism, the thought that you're being exploited, I think can be expressed. Um, I think for some people who are really religious, they think that it's wrong. We've seen countries like Italy ban this completely,
Mhm.
even for folks who are Italian but go outside of the country. And a lot of that is sort of mixed up in people's religious feelings, which, we people have a right to their own beliefs, but that can impact how people are viewed who make this decision. So that I think that can be really weighty for some of these ladies who take this on.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And thank you also for, through your filming. And I cannot wait when it will come out. Yes, so maybe later you will keep us updated. But you definitely are doing a great gift, I think, to so many by sharing the other side, right? And helping us to go past those stigmas and stereotypes. Yes. What about Ukraine yourself? So what is, and maybe don't say where the hospitals are located, right? Just, for the safety reasons, but what are some things that you notice? Or if you were to describe to someone, because some families that have not been to Ukraine and also reading so many news, and sometimes in the news, guys, well, you have been working in the news. You could say that sometimes it is more, when you show some crazy stuff, it's probably gets more attention than to say, yeah, today everything is normal. But how would you describe like the moment you step your foot in Ukraine? Yes, like maybe let's not talk about when it was, well, or if you want to talk from the moment you came the first time in January of 2022, but really now you just recently have been. So how is the feeling? How's everything?
Yeah, so I was just there in February, and I've been that was my third trip. So I've been three different times now, and each time was a little bit different because the state of the war has evolved. But I would say, Ukraine is beautiful. The people are beautiful. The place is beautiful. And when you get there, especially when you enter from, I mean, you have to enter from the western side of the country now. Um, when you go to places like Lviv, it doesn't feel like there's a war happening. Like it's very vibrant. There are people in the streets going out to dinner, you know, out at bars. I remember it was Valentine's Day when I was there, and there were all these people like making out on the street, like, it feels like anywhere in the world. And then as I went in further into Kiev, it feels that way too during the day. But then at night, when I was there, there was a lot of drone activity, and
Yeah,
like you could hear the drones flying, you can hear air defense, people shooting them down, you can hear, some attempts at shelling, that kind of thing. And that can be really unsettling for people who aren't used to it. Um, I I think it helps that I've been several times now and was there when the war started. And I think I also just have a certain personality that can brush this stuff off for better or for worse. So I just slept through most of it. But, some of the people I was there with went and slept in the bunker, and that made them feel safer. And so I think everybody sort of handles it a little bit differently. Um, but like I said, during the day, it feels like just, happy, normal, beautiful place. So, and as you go further east, that obviously changes and is more pervasive throughout all of culture. But for the most part, it feels like regular life is going on there.
exactly, exactly. Well, thank you again for sharing that. What about how do you feel that people right now in Ukraine, do you feel like they're optimistic? Do you think they're losing hope? Do you think there is, and also maybe what your surrogate have been sharing, right? Like, because a lot of times, I guess the question is, some families would be asking, what about stress, right? Like, I'm sure everyone is stressed. So how's it going to be on the baby? And, I know my answer, but like, what have you seen about the stress?
Yeah, I have seen that these people are incredibly resilient. And of course, there's going to be some measure of stress because there's a war happening outside of their door, but they're pretty unflappable overall. Like when I've talked to our surrogate about whether she is stressed, she's just sort of like, we're just used to it now. This is just our lives. And um, you know, they're not robots, so they're going to feel things, but the resilience is just really incredible. And I've seen it from the beginning of the war until now, just sort of this belief that they're, as a country, not talking about surrogates specifically, but Ukrainians are going to stand strong and fight against this and win this war. And at the same time, as a country, they're tired, and they've lost a lot of people and land, and there's some exhaustion that comes with that, but they're still really tough. And I think for me, one of the hardest things right now is being there as an American and having to talk to them about what the US government is doing
Mm,
at this moment. And hearing the feeling of abandonment a little bit and betrayal
yes.
is really hard. And you know, I hope that changes. But
No, so we as well. But again, what I love about Ukrainians that, and again, guys, the reason we're talking about Ukraine is because we're talking about Ukrainian surrogacy. Yes, we have surrogacy in US. We also, have right now surrogacy in Mexico. We're gonna have other specials on that. But because we're talking about surrogacy in Ukraine, I really want us to focus on Ukraine, right? Because that's where all of your time will be spent. Not you physically, but that's where your surrogate is. That's where the process is. Yes. So thank you for sharing your perspective. Um, could you talk a little bit more, again, like you're looking through the different lenses right now. You said you were considering USA in the past, you were considering some other countries for the surrogacy, but now that you have been involved in surrogacy in Ukraine, what are maybe some things that you feel is good about the process, or some things that continue keeping you excited about everything? And maybe what are some things you would say, like, guys, if you go for that, no, there will be some downsides, right? So let's have this real transparent conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think we made a conscious decision after needing to make a new set of embryos after we had, we started this process in Ukraine before the war, and then we were like, okay, well, we still have the embryos there, so let's keep going. But then we had to make more embryos, and we made a very conscious decision to say we're going to stay with Ukraine. And I think there were a bunch of reasons for that. My time there and, just kind of falling in love with the country and the people was a big part of it. But also, like, that paperwork you have to do is hard. And the thought of starting all over somewhere else seemed really daunting. And it just felt like, okay, somebody can help us, but we can also help somebody who's going through this war by sticking with this place. So we wanted to stay there. We made that choice very consciously. And I think for the most part, it's much easier than I think people imagine. Um, most of the country is quite stable, and so it it really isn't that big of a deal. It's not like your surrogate is in constant danger for the most part. That doesn't mean that something can't happen, but it's really unlikely. Like if you are somebody who believes in data and statistics, like given where most of these women live, it's just really unlikely that anything's going to happen to them. So, and I think being there really has helped me especially understand that, like, oh, okay, like life is quite normal. So, I think there have been extra challenges, like, shipping in the embryos the second time was a little harder because they didn't go straight into Kiev. They had a much more circuitous journey. But like there are lots of great resources with Maria and the people that you guys put us in contact with to make this a really easy, simple process. So for the most part, it has not been especially difficult because of the situation with the war. I think some things slowed down a little bit in the beginning, but now it feels like it's a quite normal pace now.
Yeah,
I can't say whether, like, if we were starting now, I don't know whether we would pick Ukraine. It's hard to know
yeah.
that. I know you're working in Mexico now, and I'd love to hear how that's going because I've heard depending on the state, it can be really different. And um, I just it doesn't feel like there's anywhere that's the perfect place. And
Mhm.
so
Yes, yes. And like you said, like we wish you could have just done all of that in your state, but I guess there are pluses and minuses to every different location. Yeah, but wherever you go, once you do your due diligence, I think everything is possible. It needs to feed with your values, with your system, and with understanding of what you really want and how far can you go, right? So thank you so much. What about and just maybe a couple questions. What are some of your maybe hopes and dreams that I know you could say, well, I just want to meet my baby, and yes, but still, like, when you see yourself now already going for the fourth time, what would you be envisioning, you and your husband? How would it be?
yeah, I mean, we've been talking about it a lot because it is coming up. And trying to think about how soon we need to get there. And I'm lucky I have a lot of friends there, so lots of people we can see. And we're thinking about, like, let's go to the Carpathian Mountains before the baby comes, and planning all this fun stuff.
Yes.
And then trying to think through all the logistics of, like, all the stuff we need and how we're going to get that. And part of me is like, oh, maybe this ceasefire will happen and we can stay longer. And
Or maybe you
which
could fly, right? Because right now we're going to be doing, quite complicated logistics for you, but everything is manageable and we like to handhold, but if you could fly, that would be.
yeah, that'd be amazing. So, thinking through all that, and of course, just it's hard to even envision what it's like to have a baby because we've never had one before. So, we've been thinking about that and reading books, and so we're so excited about that. And then, I also feel like I have this other baby in the film, so thinking through the logistics of the film and what we need to film during those times and just how we can make it a really impactful thing that can reach people and make a difference in this space and just help people to understand this side of fertility and how challenging it is for so many families, but also how accessible this solution can be
Yes,
and how to do it right.
yes,
So
yes.
excited about all of that.
Okay. Well, and thank you for mentioning, since you've spoken about film, let's end maybe when approximately do you think, like, timelines have shifted, yes, as your journey has shifted, but, are you thinking more like end of 2025, 2026? And once it comes out, because I don't believe there is any like production companies or anything behind you, it's just work of love of you and families that support you. So yeah, so when and how do you think we and our families or anyone who is listening could support you?
Yeah, so the film, we will wrap up filming probably, I would guess, in like August, maybe September, because we want to do a little bit of follow-up stuff after the baby's born too. And documentary films take a long time to put together, it turns out. So my guess is that we will edit into early 2026 and start to enter into film festivals would be my guess.
That's
It's possible that so I do have a production company that I'm working with who is really great for helping me understand like budgets and how to apply for grants and because all of this is quite expensive to make, it turns out. So hopefully we'll get into film festivals and or get distribution. So when we get closer to that time, a lot of people are doing like Kickstarter campaigns or crowdfunding campaigns. So might be sending stuff out about that. But I think the most important thing will be once it is available to the public for people to watch it and share it and make sure that everybody has a way to see it somehow and hopefully could like plan some kind of private virtual screening for members of this community, even if it's not released to the public yet. So we will definitely figure something like that out.
Well, we would love to help, and I know families would love to help. So yes, so cannot wait for this to come out. And thank you for really, I still want to say a courageous step, right? Like, because it's not just, I know it started, well, you said you still were working, in the Washington Post, but you no longer, you're independent and you had this dream, you saw there is something that could be shared and explained. So I really love and appreciate you for the fact that you made a step forward without just having it as a dream. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your support. I mean, when we were first picking an agency, what you remember probably one of the questions we asked was who is willing to let us film, and almost everybody else said no. And I get it, like it's this other complicating layer to have to ask the surrogate for that permission, and but you saw the vision and why this film would be important right away. So I really
Oh,
appreciate that.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you, thank you, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. Good to see you.